Thanks for joining us and for being able to schedule this in. I know you're testifying in another committee today. So.
Well, thank you very much for scheduling me today. My name is Annette Smith. I'm Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I don't think you've heard from us this year. We are a nonprofit that's been in existence for 20 years, founded to deal with a $1 billion natural gas power plant and pipeline project that was proposed for southwestern Vermont in 1999. And that project did not happen. I thought I was going to fight it for 2 months and get my life back. So since then, we've dealt with large farms, quarries, landfills, and for the last 10 years, I have lived and breathed the PUC. Our mission is to raise the voices of Vermonters so they have a say in what goes on in their communities and to hold corporations accountable for their actions. And I try and provide facts and information so people can make informed decisions. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify on this bill. I hope that if you'll allow me, I could expand a little bit. I've been following your committee's work. John Brabant is the guy with the camera who works with me. So we are Vermonters for a Clean Environment, a staff of 2. And so I have some comments on some other things that you've been looking at. Regarding this bill, I'm very glad I was here to hear the A&R's perspective because I largely agree with the things that have been said. The reason I asked to testify on it was in particular the section G of 30 on the specific location designated in a duly adopted municipal or regional plan, and that enables applicants to get preferred sites letters. And I was not aware that A&R had asked for an investigation into the preferred sites issue at the PUC because we will definitely participate in that. That particular aspect of it, I have some experience, and I'll give you 3 examples. I was on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission for a dozen years, all through this renewable energy development, and have been on the committee that is the one that reviews these preferred sites letters. So here's how it goes. The applicant and the landowner go to a select board and sometimes a joint hearing with the planning commission. And so the people there know the landowner and, gee, he's gonna be able to keep his land and it'll help with the taxes. And so sure, we'll give them a letter. And then they come to the Regional Planning Commission and people are very averse to going against the town. Well, in reality, here's an example. Somebody sent me an email about some event in Worcester. And it didn't say it was preferred sites. All it said was a proposal for a solar project. And it was a joint hearing of the Select Board and the Planning Commission. And it gave a specific address. So John went to video record it. And actually, I finally figured out, because I looked on EPUC for advance notices, I looked for the case, I looked for anything in Worcester, and I finally realized, oh, this must be about preferred sites. Well, it turns out that the address that was warned was not the correct address for the site, which John is on a select board, so he pointed this out to the select board chair afterwards. They granted the preferred sites letter. I have a real problem with developers for net metering projects who come in for 150 or 500 kilowatt projects and don't know anything about the grid impacts, don't know anything about who the off-taker is going to be, which is very common. And so the idea that municipalities have the ability to identify a preferred site that is going to then be used to sort of influence the position of the PUC because this is the town's position and they support it, it's very problematic. And then just recently, my 3rd example is that Rutland Town is being solicited for a lot of different solar projects by different developers. And in the newspaper article, one of the developers says, just signing this preferred sites letters doesn't mean you endorse it. So, well, what does it mean then? It certainly does mean that you're supporting the project and you endorse it. At least that's my interpretation. So the whole issue of public notice, of making sure that all of the information is available, these are all things that come after a petition's filed. And so these preferred sites letters come before anything is filed, before anything is known. It's just something that's added into the process. And I think that there's been a lot of testimony in this building on behalf of the industry. How much testimony has there been on behalf of the public and the towns? So that's kind of my role in trying to answer your questions about what it's like from the public's perspective, while I do try and understand the industry's perspective too. And so I did listen to the testimony of James Moore and Leslie Cadwell, and I do have some sympathy for the developers when it comes to getting decisions out. What I will say, though, is that over time, what we've seen is that the PUC is very good at getting decisions out on net metering projects when they are well cited. And when they aren't well cited, that's when it takes a long time. Watching some cases, one of them is in Representative Chestnut Tenderman's neighborhood. When did it start? I don't know, 2015, 2016?
Years ago.
Still going on, and there are some real quagmires, and frankly, I think it is largely the result of the developers, but also in terms of the PUC's process, and I see you have them coming in this afternoon, to the public, and probably to the developers too, they come across, or it feels like we're in the Wizard of Oz, and the secret is behind the curtain. And nobody knows what goes on behind the curtain. Now, in New Hampshire, when they have a site evaluation commission that's different from our PUC, it only needs to look at certain size projects, but they deliberate in public. And it would be great if there was more transparency of that sort. And so I don't understand their process at all about how they go about managing their cases. I do understand that they meet one morning a week. I think there's been some discussion about developing a case management system. Maybe they have it, maybe they don't. What goes on behind the scenes there is a total mystery. I mean, I've been involved in cases with the public that have waited a year and a half for a hearing officer to issue a decision. And it's very frustrating from the citizen's perspective too. The idea of these timelines and deadlines, I don't think that decision can be made in a vacuum. You need to understand what their process is. And this opens the sort of the conversation for me to the larger issue of, I appreciate your spending time on this bill, but there are so many issues that need to be addressed. That the renewable energy standard, it needs to be revisited. I mean, we have now essentially a 10 or 15-year-old energy policy and processes that have not, there are many places where they're not working. Net metering, standard offer program projects aren't getting built. If I could do one thing right now, and I had the power to do it, I would end the standard offer program today, because it has attracted a highly litigious applicant who keeps getting the contracts, because that's the way the system works. But he sued the town of Bennington, he sued the Bennington Select Board, the Bennington Planning Commission, he sued V-Trans, he sued the Bennington Regional Planning Commission, and the neighbors that I've been working with since 2014 got sued 2 days ago in a massive lawsuit. And this shouldn't be happening in Vermont. And so we need some ethical standards. We need to really look at how things are working. Now, I've got this report that we did, a white paper a year ago. And it was done with the intention of helping Vermonters understand what our energy policies are. And for those of you who are sort of new to this topic, it can be rather massively challenging. So consider this Energy Policy 101. And I wrote it last year because of these awesome young people who were going around saying, we just need to meet our goals, just meet our goals. And they thought, well, you know, we just need to build more renewables in the state. And I thought, well, people don't understand how we're meeting our goals. And so I started writing a commentary, and it got up to 3,000 words, and then I realized that this was a much bigger paper. And so this gives you, in a kind of layman's terms, what are our energy policies? If I had to update it right now, I think there's only one thing I'd add, which was the news to me this year, that Tier 3 can be met by using some fossil fuel and nuclear attributes, which just, having been involved in the legislation that led to the renewable energy standard, I can't believe that that has been allowed. That's certainly not the intention. But my perception is that this renewable energy standard is full of gimmicks, and it's not doing what Vermonters want it to do. Because Tier 1 is can be met, 75% of the goal can be met by Hydro-Quebec and alternative compliance payments based on Hydro-Quebec's environmental attributes. I don't understand why that's in existence at all. Tier 2 is really the only requirement to build in-state renewable energy and retire the renewable energy credits. But again, it came as a surprise to me to learn that that's being met by taking the renewable energy credits from homeowners and standard offer projects, and it's not really requiring the building of in-state renewable energy other than what homeowners are doing anyway, or businesses. And then Tier 3, the energy innovation sector is, so Tier 2 is 10%, Tier 3 I think is 15%, it's in the report. And you know, knowing that nuclear is involved in that, it's all rather disingenuous, and what I would like us to see is to come up with an honest renewable energy policy. The standard offer program, as I mentioned, there's statistics in here about how many projects have actually received contracts and how few have actually been built. It is successfully driving down costs, but it needs some standards up front, because a lot of the projects that I'm seeing that are problematic, the developers haven't obtained the necessary rights of way and other easements that are necessary to actually construct the project, but that's not a requirement in the application process. Net metering, the utilities have been really complaining. I think you've heard some of it from for instance, I think Washington Electric, about the cost, and the statistics the numbers are in the report. There is a real tension between the utilities and the merchant developers. The merchant developers are stuck with the standard offer program or net metering. That's the only way that they can participate. And the utilities don't want to contract for any power because they want to build it themselves. They can do it cheaper, they say, and there are financial incentives from tax bases to actually own the project. So there is a genuine tension that needs to be addressed here, because we've developed a business economy and a business model for developers that really doesn't have a supportive system to go with it. The grid constraint areas up in the Northeast Kingdom have resulted in no new development up there, while there's a lot of room in southern Vermont, but there are also substation issues. The grid is a critical part of designing renewable energy projects, and the Public Utility Commission has been having informal discussions with all these players, and there's no transcripts of them, but John has recorded them all. So they've had informal discussions with Burlington Electric, with Washington Electric and Vermont Electric Co-op, with pro se parties, with regional planning commissions. It's probably some of the most valuable information that I've seen, because the commissioners are there with the parties. They don't talk about specific cases, but they do talk about what are your issues. And the most recent one was with Vermont Electric, or VEIC and Efficiency Vermont. And I haven't watched the whole thing, but I got to the point where the head of VEIC said, we really have concluded that this has to be done kind of circuit by circuit. And in the various roles that I played, I've come to that conclusion too, that you can't really plan for energy in a vacuum unless you know what the grid issues are. And I've heard Green Mountain Power say in these informal discussions, we don't want more solar if it's not in the right place. So how do you know it's in the right place? The Act 174 energy planning, I have a separate document on that I'm sharing with you. And I view these as resources. I'm not here to advocate, I'm here to educate. It's turning into a real problem for the communities, for the municipalities. I was invited to speak to the Weathersfield Planning Commission in March. And so the other document you have is the presentation that I put together. And I didn't just go through the presentation, I used it as a reference. And the Weathersfield Planning Commission has a land use administrator who's very, very smart. He's one of the brightest people on these topics that I've dealt with. And he's the one that reached out to me because the town's trying to decide, should we do the enhanced energy planning or shouldn't we do it? And I learned that Timoth, next town over from where I live, was having the same conversation. And Weathersfield's Planning Commission invited other towns, so it was a discussion with 6 towns, municipality represented planning commissions, and the regional planning commission, energy planner staff. And fairly early in the discussion, the regional planning commissioner person said, it's impossible. The task we've been given is impossible. And I would have said the same thing later on. And it's a lot more complicated than I think that we've given time for now. But the challenge is, how does a municipality have more say? How does a community have more say? Well, so you can develop a preferred sites map. How do you do that in a vacuum without knowing the grid issues? And so the other presentation has all this information about GMP solar siting map, where it's green, and it turns out that in the area I live, it's mostly orange, and that's not based on 3-phase power, that's based on substations. And so the utilities and Velco even need to be at the table to have a full conversation about what is a good site. And the other challenge is that really all the preferred site map do is they tell the developers where to go. How does a municipality tell the developers, we don't want it here? So the net metering rule contains some guidance, just in the net metering rule, that gives 2 examples of what you can do to meet their standard. I think it's an impossible standard to meet because it has to be specific to the site. I reviewed dozens and dozens of PUC decisions, actually PSB decisions, before it became the PUC. And every single one of them said the town has not set a conservation goal for the site. The town has not set an aesthetic, has not created a clear written community standard for the site. So it's very expensive for towns to participate, so it falls to their town plan. It's not possible to write a plan that meets their standards. Meanwhile, the energy planning, enhanced energy planning, doesn't have anything to do with what the PUC is looking for. So there's total disconnect, and it's really torturing our volunteer planning commissions who can do this enhanced energy planning and get their regional commission to approve it. But is it actually going to have any meaning at the PUC? Nobody knows, because even though the law was passed in 2016, it hasn't.
Sorry, Annette. Because we keep referring to the municipalities, and I'm all for municipality involvement, but isn't one of the main things is that the regional planning commissions are supposed to be helping our municipalities do this?
The regional planning commissions.
And they're not volunteer planning commissions, they're professional planners.
So, again, I've been on a regional planning commission for a dozen years, and so I've watched the nuts and bolts, not only of the one that I was on, but also many around the state. There's a tremendous inconsistency. On the ride over to Weathersfield, the Timoth planner was reading me the document, the guidance document given to them by or a draft plan given to them by the regional planning commission, and it said people were going to stop burning wood stoves. And I really couldn't believe that's what it said. In one, and in the other document, it will show that what one town was recommended to do by a different regional planning commission, the towns are being given these solar and wind and hydro resource maps. And so I looked at one and I overlaid it on Google Earth so I could see where the prime resources were. And in that town, the Regional Planning Commission apparently advised them and gave them language and just said, everything that's shown on our map as a prime solar resource is a preferred site. I overlaid it on Google Earth, and the images are actually there, and I did it for Weathersfield too. In both cases, almost the entire preferred sites were forested. So it's a crazy way to do it, but that was guidance from the Regional Planning Commission. And so how this is being done is very different from region to region. I have some examples of one town that, under the guidance of the Regional Planning Commission, just took the sites that were, or the resources that were given, and then they're given a list of constraints, which I object that they never showed what these things would look like without forests. Because, and I asked them when they were in the pilot phase, would you please just do it without forests? So that the towns are getting guidance, but the way I've been seeing it, the regional planning commissions are happy to take the money to do this. But it's very inconsistent, and it's not really giving the towns a voice.
So, can I follow up?
Sure.
So, okay, I hear you. So do you happen to know, and I'm looking here at your testimony and presentation, do you happen to know how many now municipalities have town energy plans now?
It's in there.
Enhanced energy plans? Okay,
The
sorry.
publicly available data is in there, what VAPTA has posted, and then what that South Windsor Regional Commission has posted, but the VAPTA data wasn't dated, and so I don't think it's current. And
It's a couple dozen.
It's a couple dozen?
Yeah.
I missed that, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's a,
Go ahead, sorry.
it's a gap in the whole, what I'm giving you are two completely different ends of the spectrum. One is, this is our plan, this is how we're gonna meet it with all these different programs, and then we have on the other side of it, what's actually happening in the planning process. And in the middle there is something that really needs to happen, which is that we develop a process where people can work together, where everybody comes together to have these discussions instead of doing it in a, kind of a helter-skelter way. And I will point out, this presentation was partly an opportunity for me to simply compile the history of what's happened here. And we have been put through the ringer as the public. First, there was the Electric Generation Siting Policy Commission. If you click on the link, there's tons and tons of meetings. And then there was the solar screening ordinance, and then, so some towns have adopted that. And then there was the setbacks. And then there was the Solar Siting Task Force, where I had a great presentation called Good Solar, Bad Solar. And it's not making judgment, it's just something you sit around the room and everybody talks about it, and you start to understand. I prepared it for a Vermont Law School class. But they never did that. They never actually talked about the PUC process in either of these things. And then we got to the Act 174 working group, which was supposed to make the PUC process better. And when the PUC held the discussion with pro se parties, I've helped a lot of people participate, relatively a lot, because it's probably, I don't know the data, this is another problem. How many people have actually participated at the PUC? How many towns have actually participated? But I know who I've helped. I couldn't get a single one to go to the meeting without pro se. I got responses like, it was so painful, I never want to go back in that room again. And as I mentioned, in the case where the people just got sued, 3 people dropped out because of depositions. And so the PUC process is really brutal for the public, because it's a very legal process. Citizens give up rights as soon as they walk in the room. I've been in hearings and I just sit next to the people, and often I'm just there kind of to be moral support or emotional support. But when the lawyer for the developer says, well, that violates rule such and such, the citizens are out of luck. They don't know what these rules are. You have to literally read all the Vermont rules of procedure. The PUC has its own rules. Even lawyers who practice in other venues are very upset by how challenging the PUC is as a process to participate in. And for the public, it can get very, very challenging. In one case, it was the first case I ever helped citizens with. The citizens were served, a couple next to a project, served 290 discovery questions. And then they were threatened with sanctions because they hadn't answered all the questions. And those threats kept coming and kept coming. And those threats, the sanctions can be monetary. I've never seen any done, but it's still very scary for the people.
Sorry, who are those, who is imposing the sanctions?
Nobody's imposed them yet, but the attorneys for the developers have threatened this.
So this is by the developer's
The
attorneys?
developer's attorney pursues all of their rights given to them through this very legalistic process. Attorneys tell me, and I'm not a lawyer, attorneys tell me that this is the most legalistic process that they've ever experienced. And so there's, in fact, I'll point out that the PUC has done a good job of laying out what the process is on the website, and I would encourage you to take a look at it to answer some of your process questions, because they have updated things and there's a nice flow chart and everything.
Yep.
But
So we're gonna start to wind down
Yeah.
here, because I know some of the members have commitments at lunch. Seth, did you have a question that you wanted to?
Yeah, maybe I'm not understanding the DPS. I thought the DPS was supposed to be the kind of public advocate for stuff like this. Is that not the?
well, okay, the Department of Public Service has had so much turnover of lawyers in the last year or two. I think I'm up to 7 or 8 that have left, and the new ones are very unskilled in what they're doing. That's my honest opinion and perception, and they're not doing a good job. I'm sorry. We need a separate public advocate. New Hampshire has one. New Hampshire also has a council for the public that participates. What I would like to ask is, if anything comes out of this session, is that a working group gets set up that has the right people in it. And that includes industry, the utilities, people in regulation, for us to explore this mass of issues that we have unresolved. How do merchant developers and utilities address this tension that's between them? How do citizens and towns participate, because people want renewable energy, especially solar. They want to be a part of the process. They want to know how their town and their region is benefiting. There's a section in this report on microgrids and on the Commerce Clause. There are so many things that we need to talk about, and I hope it's not the same type of commission that's set up with people who don't know anything that we've had to go through 3 times already, where people who have no experience with the PUC are put on these committees to make sure that we don't have any change. We need change. We should embrace change. We don't need to spend so much money on lawyers. Lawyers don't solve problems. People can sit down at a table and talk about where to plant the trees. At the PUC, that can cost $50,000. This is crazy how we're citing renewable energy. And I've lived off grid with solar for 30 years. Solar works in Vermont. And it doesn't have to be this fight that we've been having. And it can be a lot less expensive for the developers. And that's what I would implore you to embrace in this. I'm going to touch on a couple other things. And one is, because you just heard testimony on eminent domain, I support removing eminent domain for fossil fuels because renewable energy developers don't have eminent domain. There is, however, a problem that I've seen where landowners in Vermont are being exploited with leases that nobody in their right mind would sign. There needs to be a standard and some sort of another level of regulation for merchant developers. And finally, I think I need to tell you that the reason I'm in the building today is to testify on H513 in the Senate Finance Committee. And I'd like to tell you why I didn't come in here to do the testimony, because I've been trying to learn about a certain aspect of the bill, and it never was clear to me why you were looking at it. So I encourage you to look up my testimony on it. I would be happy to come back and talk to you, but it's critically important. And it leads into a public group that is coming to room 10 next Thursday from 1 to 3 on the telecom issue. And I hope that you will set aside some committee time to come and listen. There will be a presentation of some sort around 1 and then open to the public, and people will be speaking about their concerns. And this is extremely important.
Thanks for your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, very comfortable. She's up
Gonna
with
fix
the
your
rain.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I.
Rubber's for you.
Yeah. I asked Olivia to send some copy to you, so we can discuss this one.
Okay.
Yeah, some copy. As opposed to a hard copy.
Oh, you emailed him yesterday.
Yeah.
That was really weird.
Never, you said,
I was like, I don't know. You're right.
well, you emailed